Sound check, sound check, sound check. Audit, Finance and Administration Committee, sound check, sound check.
And we are live.
We are live. This is the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee meeting for March 23rd. Welcome to everyone here in the chamber and watching at home. I just want to go around quickly just to identify who's here from the staff and councillors and the councils that are virtual. We have City Auditor Brown, Executive Director of Human Resources Laura Fontana, General Manager Mike Sagaric, and City Manager Jeanette Smith are here from the staff. And in the chamber, both Councillors Wilson are here, Councillor Beattie, Councillor Clark, Councillor Huang, and we have Councillor Taddison joining us virtually. On that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website, and that the presentations and reports considered at this meeting are available on the city's website, and that members of the public can contact the clerk's office to acquire documents in an alternative format. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and or visually recording this meeting. I want to ask, and I'm going to do it myself right now, that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings, and I would add, if your phone vibrates so loudly we can hear it, that also counts. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members can submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or make comments. I'm just noting again that quorum is present, and we'll get on to the agenda right away. The first thing being the approval of the agenda, which is item number 2. Clerk Bates, are there any changes to today's agenda?
Yes, Chair Kretsch, there are several changes to the agenda. We have one added staff presentation under item 8, item 8.3, Mondialization Committee Annual Report, and this item will be considered immediately following 8.1, so we're changing the order of the agenda there slightly. We also have some items under consent items, under item 9, 9.1A, Committee Against Racism Minutes, January 10th, 2023, have been withdrawn. Consent item 9.1C, Hamilton Women and Gender Equity Committee minutes from January 26, 2023 have also been withdrawn. We have a change to item 9.3, although not a change to the agenda. Report FCS 23018 on, pardon me for one moment, report of the 2022 remuneration and expenses as required under Section 284 of the Municipal Act. There is an error in Appendix A, and we'll share the correct version on the screen when we get to that item, and then I'll swap it out in eScribe after the meeting. We have one new notice of motion from yourself, Councillor Chair Kretsch, on the Fair Wage Policy Review. And then we have one new private and confidential item under item 14. It's item 14.2, Committee Report.
Thank you very much. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended? I see Councillor Huang, seconded by Councillor Alex Wilson. Any discussion on the agenda or any changes to it? Not seeing any. We'll have an electronic vote, please.
My apologies, for some reason it does not want to open.
That is okay. The robots are in charge. We'll wait for the robots. Let's go. Should folks vote again? I got a reprompt.
Have you seen a vote yet?
Yeah, I voted twice now.
All right, I'm not seeing it. Bear with me for one moment.
At this time, I guess I can fill some of the silence by saying two things. One, I'm going to stop saying the word electronic vote after the first time I say it today because there is only one way to vote. It is electronic. And if we aren't able to electronically vote, what I will do is I will ask for those in favor and those opposed. We will not be using the thumb system because unfortunately it encourages one or the other, usually the positive. So we'll just do that if manually we need to. I feel that may be coming soon. Also, we do have the Emergency and Community Services Committee shortly following this committee. So we're going to try to keep to a schedule that allows us to have a break in between. You all know that already, but just saying it again. So we try to keep the meeting moving. Shall we do a manual vote?
Yes, Chair Kretsch, I was just going to say, I hate to prove you wrong, but I am going to, that there is more than one kind of vote. We are going to do a show of hands right now, please.
All those in favor of the agenda for today? Seeing all those in favor, you may use the thumb or hand.
I see everyone.
I see everyone in favor and no one opposed, and so that motion carries. 7-0. Now we'll move on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I'm not seeing any, so we're going to move on from item 3. And now we're on to the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. And the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting are from February the 16th, 2023. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes from February 26th? I see Councillor Tadison and Councillor Huang as seconder. And all those in favor, is there any discussion about the minutes? Apologies. I want to make sure first, sorry. Not seeing a need to chat about the minutes. All those in favor of approving the minutes, if you just indicate by raising your hand or thumb. All in favor. Anyone opposed?
Yes, you may see it. I cannot see it, though, unfortunately.
We'll wait until we get the all clear for the robots before we proceed back to that. Otherwise, it'll be manual going forward. So that's 7 in favor, 0 against, and the minutes are approved. Now we're on to staff presentations. And we have first the presentation under 8.1 is the Advisory Committee for Immigrants and Refugees Annual Report. I'd like to call upon Jenny Hamilton, Advisory Committee for Immigrants and Refugees, to please turn on your microphone and camera and you begin your presentation. There's not a specific time limit on your presentation. At the end, we'll have questions for the presenter. Go ahead, Jenny, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair Kretsch. Let me just share my report. I hope the report is being seen by the committee right now.
Yeah, we can see that. We can see that very well.
Thank you very much, Chair Kretsch. Good morning to the committee. My name is Jenny Hamilton, and I am presenting the annual report for 2022 for the Advisory Committee for Immigrant and Refugees. So the mandate of the Advisory Committee for Immigrant and Refugees is to make recommendations regarding policies and procedures and guidelines that address the needs of people who are immigrant or refugees for the city of Hamilton. And I'm doing this report because we are reporting to to this committee, Audit, Finance and Administration Committee. I am the current chair. I've been the chair since the start of 2022. Our vice chair is Isham Abdul Karim, and Dora Abu Zaid is our reporting secretary. Right now, we are at 6 committee members, and our city liaison and coordinator is Lina El Khalil, and our advisor is Councillor Maureen Wilson. For 2022, we started the year by identifying that the priority of the committee was advocating for financial education for immigrants. This was a carryover discussion from 2021, and we were the committee decided that this will be what we would have been advocating for 2022. The Elections Committee also approached us in the beginning of the year asking for volunteers for a working group so that they can figure out how to reach the immigrant communities so that they can be encouraged to vote for the municipal election that happened last year. We also attended HIPSI meetings. HIPSI is the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council, and the advisory committee does hold a seat in that council, so we were able to attend those meetings. I think there were 2 for that year. And for the year of 2022, the committee met 8 times. However, 4 of the meetings did not meet quorum. So we only met January, February, March, and April. And this segues into the challenges that we've had for 2022. Our main challenge has been reaching quorum during meetings. And because of this issue, our plan to advocate for financial education for immigrants, we were not able to fulfill that. And also, even though there were volunteers for the working group, for the elections committee, that meeting did not happen. So we weren't really able to help the elections with reaching out to the immigrant communities in the city prior to the municipal election. Another challenge is training on how to become a member of an advisory committee. I was a sort of midterm recruit for the committee. I was offered the position September of 2021, and I didn't really receive any training. There were also another member who was who was offered the position at the same time. So he also did not get a lot of training on how to become a part of this committee. So, but even those challenges for this year, we do plan to um, have a more robust recruitment strategy for the committee. Maybe bring out, well, once the application for the committee is open, spread the word that we do need people, because 6 members in this committee is not really reflective of what the immigrant population of the city is. And also, we would like to advocate for training for committee members so that the um, recommendations that we present to City Council would be substantial. And that's pretty much it. It's a very short presentation. And if the committee has any questions, I am available to answer them.
Thank you. I see the speakers list here, and if you want to add yourself to it, please do so in eScribe. First up is Councillor Huang.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, Jenny, for your presentation. I'd like to understand a little bit better about what your goals are for this year, should you get full recruitment and the training that you're looking for. So all things blue skies, moving ahead, what does the Immigrant and Refugee Advisory Committee would like to accomplish in this coming year and term?
Okay. Through you, Chair, through the Chair, thank you very much for that question. We will most likely proceed with the financial education advocacy that we would want to pursue. It is something that we started, so we'd like to be able to make a recommendation to City Council about it. We have also been, like I mentioned earlier, we have been fairly active with HIPSI, and they do have studies that show what the priority or what the top 3 concerns of the immigrant community, newcomers, immigrants, and refugee committees population have. And we have shared those studies among the committee members, and we would want to address those too, if possible.
Thank you for that answer. Through you, Chair, I think that this Friday, Council will be embarking on a strategic priority session. And I think that one of these areas, what I'd like to address is how we want to leverage and use our advisory committees. As a child of immigrants, I think that one of the areas where we can seek more advice from our Immigrant and Refugee Advisory Committee is to look at workforce and talent retention, looking at how do we attract immigrants to our fair city and become part of an integrated community member. I also hope that we can speak about how do we better our immigrant serving and refugee serving sectors with making sure that they are being a lot more effective in the types of services that they are presenting. So those to you, Jenny, I think that that's one of the areas where I think I'd be interested in hearing more about, and if I can relay that as a potential suggestion is to look at it from that sort of lens and to see how your expertise would be able to inform this council as to how we can attract and retain great immigrants to our fair city and also retain refugees to our city. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Huang. If you would mind taking the chair so I can ask questions, I'd appreciate that.
Go ahead.
Thanks so much for your presentation. You highlighted a couple of things, Jenny, that I think are really important to focus on. Number one, there's clearly the ability for you folks to attend HIPSI, which is great, and that's not something every advisory committee does, by the way. So, for instance, the LGBTQ advisory committee doesn't have a seat anywhere. It doesn't sit on anything, right? So, some committees have more formal and instantiated kinds of roles like you do when you're able to go have a seat at HIPSI, for instance, and some don't. And what I'm hearing there is a kind of tension, right? Like you're able to fulfill this formal mandate of going and participating in HIPSI, but the committee itself isn't able to always get quorum. What do you see besides training as barriers for people coming out to meetings? Like what do you think makes it hard? I'm a former chair of an advisory committee, so I have some insight, but I wanted to hear what your perspective was.
Jenny?
Yep. Through the chair, thank you for that question, Councillor Kretsch. I'm glad you mentioned the attendance of the committee in HIPSI. Actually, it is quite. I'm the one who's attending these committee meetings, and actually, it is quite challenging to attend them because they're usually happening during work hours. And being a volunteer committee, not all committee members are able to take time off work to participate. I am fortunate that my workplace does understand how much I value being a member of this committee, and I am able to, we do have provisions at work which allows me to attend it, like gaining flex time. But aside from meeting quorum, I think the biggest challenge is that it is a volunteer committee, and between the choice of having to do overtime or attend a committee that is a volunteer committee, I think most members would prefer, would opt to go to work or prioritize that because it is earning them wage. Also, being a volunteer committee, it is also a challenge to attend trainings that are offered, and hopefully, because I remember last year, I don't quote me on the date, but there was a code of conduct training, and I myself was not able to attend it because it was done in the afternoon when most people are working and do not have the luxury of taking time off work and can't afford to not get paid to attend something that they're just volunteering for. And I shouldn't minimize volunteering, but it is challenging, especially for this demographic, to go unpaid for things that they like doing.
Thank you, Jenny. Councillor?
Thank you so much for saying that. I think it's a really important point that we have to consider when we're thinking about reviewing advisory committees is the idea that paying people for their time is an important thing. And not everybody is able to participate without being paid to take up their time to do these things, and that creates a division in time in some ways where there's those folks who are able to volunteer their time during the day or able to give up time at certain moments and those who aren't. And we want to have full participation from everybody. And of course, as you know, disproportionately, immigrants and refugees are going to have a harder time doing that than other people are going to. And so I appreciate you bringing up that tension and also talking about training. My question to you following that is, that explains to me, I think, gives me the answer about why you see there are quorum issues specifically for your committee. You talked about expanding the size of the committee, and this is something the LGBTQ Advisory Committee actually did. We had a 9-member committee, and then we expanded to 15. And honestly, from my perspective, it made a huge difference in terms of our ability to have more representation. Is that kind of the similar thing you're looking to do, is have a kind of that size of committee around 15 and bring more representation in?
Jenny?
Through the chair, thank you for that question. I would, the hope in a perfect world, I would want more, it would really be ideal to have more committee members and members that would be representative of the immigrant demographic that we have in the city. Like that it would be proportional. We don't have, I'm the only Filipino on the committee when there are a lot of Filipinos. I think we are the third in number of immigrants in the city. We don't have any East Asian representation within the committee. So in the recruitment process, I am hoping that it'll be more that is taken into consideration, that it's more well-rounded, that there is, a proportional representation of each community, not just from cultural backgrounds, but also in terms of, um, you know, uh, orientation.
Okay. Thank you, Jenny. Counselor?
Thank you so much for being honest in your feedback, for coming here today and giving this annual presentation, for taking time from your job to be here. It's so valuable. Know that we're hearing you loud and clear. Thank you so much for your time.
Back to you, Counselor, Chair.
Okay, are there any other questions for the presenter? I'm not seeing any more questions for the presenter. So at this point, we're going to have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation. I see Councillor Taddison was first off the draw, and second is Councillor Huang. I'm going to ask folks who are in favor of receiving a presentation to raise their hand or indicate.
Chair Critch, we do have the vote working again.
Robots are back, everybody. I apologize. To the electronic vote we shall go.
Just waiting for Councillor Maureen Wilson. Are you able to vote?
No, the robot is on spec.
All right. How would you like to vote? In favor?
And that carries 7-0. Thank you so much for your time, Jenny. If you'd like to hang out on YouTube, you can see the rest of the meeting. Otherwise, have a great day. We're now going to move on to the next presentation from the Mondialization Committee. It's their annual report. I'd like to call upon Anthony Macaluso, the chair of the Mondialization Committee, to please turn your microphone and camera and begin your presentation. Go ahead, Anthony. We can see you. And your presentation is loading and we can also see it. But alas, we cannot hear you. You are in the land of mute. There you are.
How are we now?
Great, we can hear you now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, guests. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present a report from the Hamilton Mondialization.
Sorry to say, Anthony, but somehow you returned to mute again. You're still muted. There you are. There you go.
All right, thanks. Sorry about that. But just by way of introduction for those who may not be familiar with what the role or the origins of the Mondialization Committee was, it was a committee developed by Council, which came out of the aftermath of the Second World War, and specifically the drop of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And in 1968, City of Hamilton, by resolution of Council, was made a world or mondialized city. So what is it and what our goal is and what the purpose of our committee is to promote Hamilton as a world or mondialized city dedicated to global awareness, cooperation, world law, further the work of the United Nations, undertake twinning programs, involve citizens of Hamilton, different cultures, especially from those of our sister communities, and to include representatives from Council to implement the above programs. So who we are, so for this past term, myself had the honor of serving as chair, along with Vice Chair Rosemary Batista, Ryan Ende, Jan Lucas, and Bob and Patricia Semkow as the citizen members, former Councillor Vanderbeek as our council representative, and former Mayor Eisenberger as an honorary member of our committee. So in case you know, our city of Hamilton is twinned with 10 communities around the globe. The first one being in Canada, which came as a result of some of the pull and ties to try and strengthen the bond between French and English Canada. The former town of Dundas, has a lengthy and strong partnership with the city of Kaga in Japan and does an annual exchange with them. We are also twinned with the city of Mangalore in India, Okayama, Japan, Rakamuto, Sicily, Manchester, China, Flint, Michigan, Sarasota, Florida, Valle Paligna in Abruzzo, Italy, and Monterrey, Mexico. So many would be familiar with most of those cities, and some of them have stronger bonds in the last number of years than some of the other ones. Notable Flint, where we have the ongoing Canusa Games, which is a major project between our two cities. I mentioned Kaga has a cultural exchange between Canadian students and Japanese students. And we have the city of Rakamuto in Sicily in Italy, which has a large population of immigrants here in the city. And there continues to be a lot of work done with that group. You'll notice as you come into work or came this morning, you'll see the Sicilian cart is in the foyer of City Hall, which is part of that twinning initiative there between those two sister cities. So the committee really does a number of things and have done a number of things in the course of the last number of years. Two of our main projects are the photo contest and World Citizenship Award, which take place alternating years. We also help foster cultural exchanges and student exchanges, display commemorations. There is the annual Hiroshima and Nagasaki Memorial. We also support the Gandhi Mandela Peace initiatives, as well as support visiting delegations such as the one that took place this past September from the mayor of Rakamuto and members of that city delegation. So what we're looking to do and what we're hoping to do as we head into the next term and have had some discussions about what can and what we'd like to continue to do is obviously to continue to promote Twin City initiatives, not just with ones that we have, our current ones, but to explore not only opportunities to increase our existing twins, but are there opportunities for growth on that list? We look to partner with other organizations to support and foster peace initiatives, continue to support cultural exchanges, and the hope is that we can tie that into also some economic development. All our goal is with our 10 sister cities from across the globe is to continue to celebrate the diversity that is our Hamilton community and to support the work of other committees and look for opportunities for synergy. So during Jenny's presentation with regards to the Immigrant and Refugee Advisory Committee, there may be, and I believe there would, some opportunity for our committees to work to look at some ways to help promote our community, celebrate that diversity, as I mentioned. And of course, continue to be open to any and all ideas that will help better aim our community for all our citizens, because that is the goal of the World City Initiative, is to continue to make our world a better place so that we gain some understanding and appreciation of the diversity that's not only Hamilton, but is our world. That's it for my presentation. Happy to answer any questions that may come out of it.
Sorry, thank you very much. I do see that there are two speakers on our speakers list who have questions. It's Councillor Huang and Councillor Alex Whitson. Councillor Huang, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony, for your presentation, and through you, Chair. Anthony, you and I have had a chat before. I'd like to understand a little bit more about mondialization, because to this point, it has mostly been cultural type initiatives. But what, in your mind, how do you see the Mondialization Committee sort of expanding into economic development? What are some of your thoughts around that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for that question, because yes, we have talked about that, and there is the opportunity to expand beyond culture. I think what we've discussed, again, only my personal belief would be that there's an opportunity not just with Hamilton Economic Development Department, but also Tourism Hamilton, just to work together to bridge the experiences that we have here, the people that we have here, but also to forge and foster those connections with some of our sister cities and countries that we are twinned with to gain a better position for Hamilton, not only culturally, but economically as well. One of the challenges that we have and as we discussed, is some of the terms of reference as relate to this specific committee, and that economic development has specifically not been a part of this committee's terms of reference, but in that opportunity to be there. Again, as an example, had a delegation from Rakamutu came, they were very much, they met with members from both economic development and tourism Hamilton. We were able to help foster that on an, not in an official capacity, but we're able to help bridge those gaps. So, I mean, potentially the opportunity is there as we look towards the next terms, that there would be the opportunity there to be that bridge towards between culture, economic development, trade, and tourism, et cetera. Will only benefit ourselves and our sister communities as well.
Wonderful, thank you for that. And through you, Chair, I think my follow-up question is, Twin Cities is a bit of an older concept nowadays, and even now when we're thinking about how economic development partnership ties are, how do you see the Mondialization Committee sort of evolving past the Twin Cities concept? How would you leverage the infrastructure of Mondialization Committee to actually facilitate that next generation of what international partnerships look like?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the core of what mondialization is relationship. So if we can, again, much like Jenny says, we can take the experiences, both lived and relationships, et cetera, our communities have with their own home communities, with connections they have abroad, connections that they have in other jurisdictions. It's only going to help us, again, both from an economic standpoint, but also from a diversity and understanding standpoint. So I think if we can look at mondialization in terms of being a conduit to help build and strengthen these relationships, I think that's where I would see us going for, again, not so much in the past sense of what a twin city relationship would be.
Thank you. Thank you again, Anthony. Those are all my questions, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Huang. And now, Councillor Alex Wilson.
Thank you, through the chair, and thank you, Anthony. Really, really excited about the Mondialization Committee and our kind of forthcoming rounds with citizen volunteer selection and kind of getting this up and going and seeing what you have on for these next kind of couple of years. And from this past term, I heard that there's the existing 10 relationships, looking to continue and strengthen upon those, looking for maybe some new relationships. And then Councillor Wang was asking some questions about economic development and how to move those pieces forward. I hear that there's lots of potential and some of that's been discussed by the committee. Are there any kind of starting points, or when you're thinking about this year ahead or some of these bigger transitions that the committee's been talking about, what are some of those first steps the committee's been thinking about in terms of either specific projects on the existing partnerships or specific communities to kind of reach out to for new partnerships, or how would you go about that?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, in previous councils, there has not been an appetite to grow the list of cities, and I think it's, again, through you, Mr. Chair, what the note is that the Twin Cities the thought of what a Twin City notion is maybe past us. But again, if we look at what those changes can be, we can get that next step. I think what I would believe we need to do is, as I said, explain those terms of reference to what actually the Mondialization Committee would do, have the supports, talking about economic development, tourism, potentially having staff present or contribute more to those meetings, or how we can support them in their goals going forward, those types of things. But I think that all starts with recruitment. Again, much like colleague Jenny on the immigrant and refugee advisory said, I mean, if we had specific and targeted recruitment, we were able to cast a wider net in terms of diversity of our city and ensuring that we have membership on the committee who have experience, who have connections, who have the abilities to make those relationships with not only our existing communities, but potentially the future communities. I think that's what's going to be able to allow us to continue to strengthen this movement.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate the kind of the focus to the terms of reference as maybe being a first step of early discussion for this next term of committee. A follow-up question to that is, in terms of enabling that and enabling the work that it seems like a lot of folks are interested in taking on, and there's been some discussions about what those next steps look like. Similar to the past presentation, is the committee membership in its current form of 6 to 8 members, 2 kind of council members and 6 community members, is that the structure needed to enable this work? Or if there's a new mandate or some new discussions, might a new structure also be part of that? Or has any conversations been had so far?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So there has some conversation that perhaps growing that list would be beneficial to it. I mean, obviously, having 10, if we're just looking at the existing 10 cities, having people on the board who have specific relationships with of those communities would be definitely beneficial. Being able to hear from those who would have connections with our Chinese counterparts, with Indian counterparts, with Mexican counterparts, would bring a better experience, would allow us to do more, because one of the challenges that we face is that, as I mentioned, specifically with Flint, with Kaga, and Rakamuto, we have very strong community support and community leadership to continue and foster those relationships. With some of the other cities, there simply isn't the community drive or a significant connection. So if I look at, for example, the city of Sarasota, there isn't really a significant item there or a connection there that allows us to really continue to have. So we're really cities in name only. Again, Flint, we have existing Canusa games. Kaga, we have the ongoing cultural exchange. Rockwood, we have the continuing that take part in that community. But again, but that can change the makeup of the board. We have a very small but mighty board, is very passionate about our peace initiatives, the Hiroshima, Nagasaki, supporting the Mandela Gandhi Peace Initiative, those types of things. But if we're looking to expand beyond just the cultural and peace initiatives aspect, then yeah, it would definitely be great to target more potentially, but also effective and those with the lived experience are going to be able to help us to build, as I said, those relationships.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And through the chair, those are all my questions. Really, really excited about the work and kind of the potential that committee members are talking about, kind of continuing the great work going on and also what comes next. That's a really exciting conversation. Thanks for sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Councillor Alex Wilson. And the last speaker on the list for now is Councillor Mark Tattison.
Hi, Anthony. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I guess I'm just noticing from the imagery in your room there that you are a sports fan, and I'm wondering if sports in some way can maybe be a link to developing further relationships. I noticed that in our twinning, and I'm not sure if we say cities anymore, but in community searches, I noticed that there's a lack of presence from South America, Africa, and Australia. And I'm wondering if sport could probably, or maybe be a bridge that helps us bring communities from those areas of the world into this mondialization.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I couldn't agree more with you. There is the opportunity. Again, I look to the Canusa Games as a prime example of a way for our communities, both of Hamilton and Flint, to bond, to strengthen the relationship, primarily for sport. I know Hamilton and Rakamuto have done soccer team exchanges, those types of things. So I absolutely agree that sport can be a great conduit to try and build relationships. I know were approached in the last term from Rio in Brazil about potentially examining what a twinning relationship would look like. Again, it was determined that would be reassessed with the next council, and the current council would look at whether that's something they want to examine. But yeah, there have been opportunities, and I would completely agree that sport can and should be and continue to be a very important part of what it means to share our cultures and our community with the global community.
Yeah, just following up with that also, I think soccer is, it's a world sport basically, and we've got the Hamilton Forge here, and communities from those areas, specifically South America or Africa, would be a great bridge, and maybe we could enlist the Forge or the Ticats to help facilitate those relationships in some way, and then just again with Australia, some sort of relationship with Australian rules football team and the Ticats, I thought might be something that we could look at. Anyways, just throwing those concepts out there. I know they're coming from a baseball term left field, but I think it's good to consider all avenues for developing relationships. So thank you very much, Anthony.
Thank you.
Thank you. And before the delegate departs, we're going to receive their presentation. So if I could have a mover and a seconder to do so. Councillor Alex Wilson moved, seconded by Councillor Wang. And we will go to electronic votes in favor or opposed. And that carries. And thank you, Delegate Macaluso, for your time. And if you want, you can also go to YouTube and follow the rest of the meeting. Otherwise, have a great day. And I think we may have reached our quota of sports references for the day, but that's not a challenge. That's not a challenge. One moment. Right, okay, we're on to 8.2 now, which is happening after 8.3. It's okay, that's on purpose. It's the Fraud and Waste Hotline Pilot Program Evaluation. Sorry, I just want to add a bit of excitement there. Audit report AUD 23005. And with us we have this, Auditor General Charles Brown to please come forward to the podium and begin your presentation.
Thank you, Chair Kretsch. Through you, I present our hotline evaluation report. The main purpose of the evaluation is to provide our assessment of the 3-year pilot of the hotline so that a decision can be made whether or not to make it permanent. It's perhaps useful to explain the situation that we had before the hotline was launched. Prior to 2019, we had no tool for the administration or case management of our investigations. We had no tool or service capability to provide intake for complaints on a 24/7 basis or in a way that was convenient and confidential. Whatever complaints were made came directly to our office by way of email, phone call, or traditional mail service, the so-called brown envelope. We had a very low volume of complaints each year, usually from about 2 to 5. And that level persisted even after we undertook a campaign to publicize the whistleblower policy. Through anecdotal information as well as the city's employee survey, we were aware of a significant number of employees that were not comfortable bringing forward concerns. And lastly, there was no mechanism for the public to be engaged in bringing forward complaints of wrongdoing or waste. So in 2018, we brought forward a proposal for a hotline based on what some other cities were already doing. Council at that time approved a 3-year pilot program to test the usefulness and uptake of a hotline, and we had a 3-year total budget approved of $94,500. Approval in hand, we conducted a competitive procurement and awarded the contract for hotline intake services to Whistleblower Security, Inc. in 2019. After a couple of months of setup, configuration, and training on the software, the hotline was launched in July 2019 to run for 3 years until July 2022. Now, originally we had planned on an evaluation of the pilot to be brought in early fall 2022, but thought that it would be more appropriate to wait so that the new council could make the decision. What the hotline contract gave us was a service that provides intake for anyone that wishes to report suspicions of fraud, waste, or wrongdoing involving city resources. This service is confidential. It allows anonymity to be preserved throughout the process. It is operated independently of the city, is accessible online by phone as well as mail, and is available 24/7 to both employees and members of the public. Our goals and expectations for the hotline service were to provide a convenient, accessible, and confidential channel for employees to report concerns. Through its use, build trust so we would see more cases being reported, and help break down perceived barriers and risks facing employees who would like to raise concerns. Have a mechanism for engaging with the public on their issues concerning government waste or perceived wrongdoing. Have such services delivered at reasonable cost. And finally, we wanted to be able to address important issues that would result in positive change and improvement. As you will see in the following slides, all our goals have been met. And in fact, our expectations with respect to those goals exceeded. In particular, the volume of reports was higher than expected and continues to grow. Our investigations and audits have raised important concerns and drawn attention to systemic issues, as was demonstrated in our 3 annual reports issued by our office since inception. This slide shows the volume of reports compared to what was expected for the first 3 contract years. As well, we've added for the last calendar year. Our volume expectation was based on research of other cities, and it was in the range of 50 to 70 reports per year. As you can see, in every year, volume exceeded these expectations and has shown very significant growth in year 3 onward. There were a total of 272 reports filed over the course of the 3 pilot years, ending June 30th, 2022. Now, for your information, if you extend that to now, in other words, since its inception to now, it's actually, as of today, 394 total reports so far. Of the 272 reports, the method of reporting most used was online reporting at 112. The online reporting tool offers convenient access and allows users to maintain confidentiality using a unique access identifier and PIN number. And this in turn allows correspondence directly with investigators without necessarily revealing reporter identity. The substantiation rate, as you can see, was quite respectable, coming in at 21% the first year and 32% for both the second and third years. Of the 272 filed reports in that 3-year period, there were 68 that resulted in investigation by our office and 103 that were referred to other areas in the city, with report backs being required of management and, where applicable, a description of actions being taken provided. Overall, during the pilot phase, 57% of reports came from city employees and 43% were from members of the public, demonstrating, I think, successful engagement of the public. One of the goals that we had for the hotline was to use case information to drive spontaneous audits and deliver systemic insights and process improvement. That goal also was met, and the extent to which that happened exceeded our expectations. we made it a practice to initiate system or process audits in response to reported issues that could have systemic repercussions. And this is a list of the spontaneous audits that we launched as a result of hotline complaints. In fact, these audits initiated by the hotline generated 176 recommendations for improvement action by management with an acceptance rate of 99%. This shows the cumulative outcomes related to the hotline over the 3-year pilot period. There were 14 terminations and 15 other types of HR action, and the total value of loss or waste estimated at $1.16 million, with recoveries of $33.3 thousand. One of the more enduring reasons organizations have hotlines is to reinforce ethics and support integrity as a corporate value. And certainly for Hamilton, having a hotline and a supporting capacity to deal with the issues that come up has and does demonstrate commitment to ethics and integrity as corporate values. One tool available to the city for looking at the ethical environment in general is the Our People survey. We've had 2 surveys, one in 2017 and another in 2021. The hotline was launched right in between the 2 in 2019. On the positive side, these surveys tell us that from 2017 to 2021, the score went up for the degree of comfort employees have in speaking up by 2.4 percentage points. On the other hand, the survey category ethics and integrity had the lowest scores of the 5 major areas of survey. And compared to 2017, the 2021 score relating to employee confidence in upholding the code of conduct has declined by 5.3 percentage points. So what this tells us is that the willingness to speak up is trending in the right direction. However, the pressure to compromise ethics and values is becoming more problematic. In evaluating the hotline, we also look to important external research about the impact of hotlines in dealing with ethics issues. Specifically, we looked at the 2022 Global Report to the Nations on occupational fraud. That's fraud in the workplace. And this was done by the Association of Certified Forensic Examiners. They used data from 133 countries to reach their major research conclusions, which were that frauds are more likely to be detected with a hotline in place. The dominant method of fraud detection is tips by more than 3 times the method next in line. Fraud losses were 2 times higher at organizations without hotlines, presumably because of earlier discovery when you have a hotline. Complainants have a diverse and evolving set of preferences for reporting suspicions of fraud, so the research suggests having multiple channels for reporting. Finally, having both a hotline and audit capabilities are critical to fraud risk mitigation. In making any decision about a program or policy, it's important to understand the impact on cost. The pilot was given a 3-year total cost budget of $94,500. However, we've been able to run significantly under that due to competitive pricing. Under our current contract, even after 4 years, we will be under by $30,000. Our annual cost for the service, I believe, has been very reasonable at $12,000 $500 per year. Considering that this provides us the use of the vendor's case management software and gives us multiple intake channels, including the online reporting tool and live operators on a 24/7 basis. Based on our research, this compares quite favorably to other cities. As the volume of cases continues to rise, so does the workload and impact on our current staff. We don't have any dedicated investigations staff, so from time to time we supplement our resources with outside investigators. Not including the time spent by the two management team members, for the last contract year of the hotline, we used the equivalent of 2.3 FTEs out of 5 frontline staff on investigations and audits related to hotline complaints. This is approximately the equivalent of 10 to 12 audits over a 3-year period. I said before that we've had very competitive pricing for the hotline service, a situation that brought it significantly under budget for the 4 years. For that reason, we're asking for approval to negotiate extension of the contract under Policy 11 for 5 more years. According to the procurement bylaw, a Policy 11 approval by Council is required where the multi-year contract value exceeds $250,000 or the extension exceeds 18 months. Given that we've spent $66,000 for 4 years, it is the latter criteria that applies in this situation, since we expect to be able to negotiate a price in line with the current arrangement, albeit with potential inflationary adjustments. The other reason is in the original procurement, we received only 2 compliant bids, and the winning vendor had a cost per point that was less than half the other proponent. The market today remains a small niche market, and we're very satisfied with the service. Lastly, by extension, we can maintain continuity of service, avoid switchover to new software, and also avoid potentially 2 months of configuration, setup, training, and associated costs of $5,000 to $10,000 with a different vendor. As you know, the position of city auditor was designated and given the authority and independence of an auditor general, and this happened in 2012. At that time, the intended model was referred to as a hybrid. Hybrid meant that the office would be constituted as a combination of functions. For audit and investigations, it would operate as an auditor general, but it would also be able to operate as an internal auditor and therefore undertake risk assessment and consulting assignments. However, in the last few years, the investigative demands placed on the office and the need to carefully avoid conflicts of interest from performing consulting work have meant that we have only been able to function as an auditor general. In reality, we have shifted entirely to auditor general work. In addition to that, we believe it would enhance the perception of independence of our office to change its name to Auditor General, thus building trust and confidence in our investigative responses. A change of name will require revisions to be made to various bylaws, the whistleblower bylaw, the Auditor General bylaw, and procedural bylaw. It will also require changes to the audit charter, both to amend the name and also to remove services applicable to the internal audit function, namely risk assessment and consulting. Since we would be making changes to the whistleblower bylaw to accommodate the new name, we also thought it would be opportune to make a content change that would enhance its effectiveness. As a result of our experience with so many investigations these last 4 years, we have come to the conclusion there is a need to extend whistleblower protection beyond those employees who filed the original complaints to also include employees who are cooperating witnesses to our investigations so that they are also protected from reprisal for providing evidence to investigators. With the assistance of legal services, we have highlighted the proposed amendments in the appendices of the report. With that, I will wrap up by saying that the hotline has and continues to provide significant benefits. It plays an important role in the deterrence of fraud and waste. It helps strengthen internal controls and improve policies and procedures. And in the long run, builds a more accountable, value for money culture in the city that helps us all be better stewards of the public dollar. I will close by summarizing the recommendations we've made in our committee report, which are to make the hotline permanent, to approve negotiation with the current vendor for extension of the contract, to rename the office to Auditor General, and finally to approve the necessary bylaw and charter amendments reflecting the new name, as well as the proposed enhancement to the whistleblower bylaw to include cooperating witnesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Auditor General Brown. And I'm now going to turn to speakers. And there are speakers in Councillor Beattie, Councillor Huang, Councillor Clark, and then myself. And we'll start with Councillor Beattie. And there should be questions on the presentation. If it's about the recommendation specifically, we'll save that for the time when we're discussing the report.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I like this presentation. I'm very thankful for the work put into it. I agree that well, I guess I'll save commentary and stick to questions because I am very enthusiastic for what I see. Specifically, City Auditor Brown, soon to be hopefully Auditor General Brown. The program cost of the pilot, originally budgeted for $94,000, came in somewhere in the neighborhood of $12,500 per year over 4 years, and you gave a mention to being in that $60,000-ish.
I think it was 66. There were startup costs associated with configuration and setup and training.
You made mention that this should come in under a new contract should come in under the $250,000 threshold.
Well, I would certainly, if it's significantly more, then I would be reconsidering whether or not to do a competitive procurement. I can assure you. My assumption is we'll be able to negotiate something in line with our expectations. Yes.
I'm just trying to tease out through you, Chair, the kind of what is the bottom line cost estimate that you have for this? Is there a specific number that you're able to provide in terms of what the go forward would be on a permanent hotline?
I'm not sure I'd want to reveal that in public, but let's just say in line with inflationary increase and the service levels that we're asking for.
I understand. Thank you. The hotline, I think you've demonstrated, has led to increased activity in your office as a result. I'm wondering if there was a cost impact there in terms of staffing or time allotment or anything, and if that is reflected anywhere.
So we did not include a cost impact insofar as the 2.3 FTEs is concerned, because obviously we're getting some value back for it. We're getting additional value. It's not a hotline cost per se, it's a cost of the investigation or any audit that we're doing. So So if one assumes that it's time well spent, then it has its own meter of acceptability in terms of value for money.
Okay, and through you, I guess my basic question through the chair is we want to make sure that we're successful as we move forward, as you have been. And I just want to make sure that if there were other implications for staffing costs or an overall universal budget for the program in general, that it's all properly captured. I guess that's what my question would be.
So for your information, through the chair, we have listed in future budget next year for one additional FTE to take the load off the investigative needs that we currently experience. So that's something that will be coming next budget cycle for one person.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. No further questions.
Thank you, Councillor B. And next from our speakers list for questions of the presenter, Councillor Huang.
Thank you. Thank you, and through the chair, to Auditor Brown. I wonder if you spoke about this before, and that was slide 12 in your presentation, so way back in the early part of this presentation, where the loss of waste and mismanagement that was substantiated was 1.16 million, but then the losses recovered by the City of Hamilton was 33,000. So I wonder, are there any ways that we can improve upon that loss recovery, or is there any type of potential additional action that we can look at to try and recover some of those losses, making this a little more in line with the substantiated losses?
Well, yes, there is. The best way to improve the situation with losses, I think, is to continue the hotline.
Fair.
As research showed, we have a much better chance of finding something out sooner, which means the loss doesn't accumulate over year over year. So if you're asking my advice, that's what it is. In terms of, now some of these losses, the recoveries, improving recoveries, that's all a factor of it being typically something that was admitted to by the perpetrator. And if they were being, I can think of one example where they were being charged by the police, and the reason we were able to exact a recovery is it would put them in favor of the court in terms of the disposition of that case and the penalties that they would. So that's something that's, maybe beyond our control sometimes. It can fluctuate considerably depending on the case. So it's hard to put a hard predictor on how much we can expect to get.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. I think I'd like to dig into a separate sort of topic then, is to look at the eventual Office of the Auditor General, and where I think about what you had said about part of the scope, we'll look at not only auditing, but value for money. So as you envision what that Office of the Auditor General, how do you, that value for money, I think, is going to be so important moving forward. So how do you expect to staff that? What are some of the different ways you'd like to essentially execute on what that value for money aspect of the scope will look like?
Through the chair, so a couple of things. One is, for all intents and purposes, ever since the pilot, we've been operating as an Auditor General. What has been our biggest challenge is being diverted from our work plan to do the cases that come up. Now, in a lot of situations, that's been of benefit because we've actually, I had a list of how many audits that were spontaneous audits as a result of what we had seen in an investigation. So I think they were quite legitimate from that perspective. We gained a lot of insights as to systemic issues. But our biggest challenge has been the diversion of resources from value for money to the investigation. So that's the reason we put in for next year's budget the addition of one FTE to take a load off so that we can go back to doing more value for money audits off the audit work plan.
Thank you for that My last question then is potentially how much oversight would you also be for all parts of the city of Hamilton? I was just reminded that Hamilton in the Spectator actually announced that we have been listed for sorry, let me just pull that up. Hate crimes targeting race or ethnicity have increased for a third straight year here in Hamilton. And so I wonder if that is something that within the Office of the Auditor General would be in scope to look at how our Hamilton Police Services are actually being effective when it comes to some of these giant societal challenges. Would that be in scope for the Office of the Auditor General?
So in terms of what an Auditor General can or cannot do, it's very prescribed by the Municipal Act. And police services is one area that we do not have jurisdiction over, as is public health. So those are two areas that we can't audit unless we're invited.
Oh, I see, okay.
In the past, there have been situations where we're invited in to do an audit.
Okay.
So there would have to be some kind of advocacy on the part of council to get us that invitation. Otherwise, I don't have the jurisdiction. And that's straight out of the Municipal Act.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Huang. And I now see that I'm up, so if you wouldn't mind taking the chair, I'd appreciate that. Oh, I'm so sorry. If I was doing the reading part properly, I would see Lord Clark there. Councillor Clark, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Can we look at the whistleblower bylaw, the original one that we brought in, I think it was in 2012. At that time when I brought that motion, we were the first municipality in the country to actually bring in a whistleblower bylaw. So if I'm understanding your recommended amendment to that bylaw, it would broaden the scope to include employees that may be witnesses or may be able to provide additional information that may be used in the investigation. Is that's
through the chair?
That's
correct. It is somewhat of a gray area because we've had this situation in some of our cases already. Are they whistleblowers? Are they? It's kind of a gray area. Do you actually have to be the originator of the complaint only to be protected? And we've taken the view that no, it includes people that come forward with information as part of an investigation. We would just like to make that clear to employees so that they understand it, that they can be protected.
And I would imagine that would be most helpful. Can I ask, Mr. Chairman, if I may, when we look at your annual report, is there a way of providing snippets of an investigation? For example, and I'm making this up, but the allegation was in cleaning supplies. Here's what the allegation was. Our investigation revealed this. So that the public and our employees can see the types of complaints that you are investigating without revealing any sources or identities, just in a general way, here's what transpired.
Yes, Councillor, we currently do that. We have abstracts of the significant investigations. I think there's typically 12 to 15 in there, I think, at the back of the report.
Okay.
So we're very careful not to reveal the identities or provide information that one might be able to deduce the identities of the people, where unless it's something that is already in the public domain.
I understand. Thank you for that, and I'll look for that. I didn't see it, but it was a long day yesterday.
Yeah.
On page 2 of Appendix A, you're indicating that the authority of the Office General, they're granted full, free, and unrestricted access to any and all records, property, and personnel related to any function under review. So that's a pretty broad scope.
It is, and it's directly from the Municipal Act.
And with that authority and the change in scope for you, I have to be bold here. Are we going to be paying you more money now, sir?
I'm not here to ask for a raise, if that's what you mean.
That's what I mean.
No, I don't see any change. I mean, we've been doing this for the last 3-4 years. This is how we've been operating. So it's really ratifying. It's really recognizing reality.
It's putting it on paper.
Putting on paper what we're really doing.
Thank you. And the last question is about costs. I listened intently to my colleague to the right or to the left, Councillor Beattie, who asked a question about the costs of the program. Candidly, I was surprised by your response that you didn't want to reveal that in open session. I'm trying to understand why wouldn't we reveal publicly what the total costs are to run your program?
Oh, the total cost that we've paid is around $66,000. I thought the question was what kind of, I inferred from your question that, you know, what would be my bottom line in negotiations with a new contract? That's what I was uncomfortable talking about in public. Happy to talk in camera about that, but I don't want to reveal my negotiation position or strategy for the new contract is what I, but yes, it's been roughly $66,000.
For the whole program?
For the whole, for 4 years of delivery of this program.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Much appreciate. Quick comment, I sincerely appreciate, as we all do, the work that you do. It is very challenging work, but I think you and your team are the right people to do the job, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And now for real, can you take the chair, Councillor Quay?
I suppose.
I only have 2 questions, and I'll be brief, and thank you for your presentation. I know this is a pilot, and so over the 4 years that the pilot existed, if I understand that correctly, you had expectations of a response, right? So you talked about there being a 2 to 5 a year beforehand, and then of course you had an expected response, and there's a band on slide 6.
Yes.
But the thing I noticed about that, not to be too picky, is that the band never changed over the 4-year period, even though the expectations of your response likely would have. So what I'm wondering is if this pilot is made permanent, if you'll be adjusting that year to year, because I think that having that band be stable across the entire period, even though you can see the trend going up, right, makes it seem like we've set the expected response, even though, like, I'm asking if it could be more nimble. Like, can we have a more nimble expected response year to year over year rather than setting it for a 4-year period?
Through the chair, yes, I think we can and should be more nimble, and I would expect to do so as part of the negotiation of a new contract, because it has an effect on the service we get too, so I expect that discussion. The question for me is, and it's a tough one, right, because, and it affects how many resources I ask for. You know, will it continue to rise? Where will it level off at some point? What's the stable number as far as year to year? And that I can't predict yet. I don't know that we've seen the peak of the rise yet. So it's difficult to come up with that number for sure.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you. My second question is more to give you a chance to elaborate on something you said before, which I think is worth doing. And in your presentation, you talked about, on slide 12, you pointed out there was $1.16 million of identified waste, and then there was $33.3 thousand, which is about half the budget you just talked about coming back. And we're not going to get there. Like, we're not going to suddenly be able to retrieve 50% of the 1.16 million. That's not the goal of the program. Could you identify for me why focusing on, right, our return monetarily may not get us to where we want to get, and the focus ought to be on, as you talked about, I think, the cultural affect that this is going to have in terms of our integrity as an organization?
So through the chair, I would agree it's going to be difficult, particularly with waste, and the bulk of that number is waste, not fraud. You know, waste is waste, it's gone. I don't know. With fraud, you perhaps have a perpetrator that you can go after and recover from, but with waste, obviously, that's gone forever. And I think really the importance of that number is just to signal the importance of the audit or investigation that we did, of finding out the issue and the importance of having good stewardship in terms of our programs and functions. It illustrates the kind of cases that we're getting and the success we're having getting to the bottom of things that are important.
Thank you. And though I didn't ask, I really appreciate you delineating the difference between waste and fraud, because that makes it a little bit clearer, I think, to how we're understanding this, right? If much of what you're saying is that we're having waste that can't be recovered, right? And so we can recover some fraud. I think that may even be helpful in future, breaking it down in that way, visually also, so we can see, or in that slide 12, because I think that that would help us to understand the relationship between these things, right? How much waste there is and how much fraud there is. It might help to, I think, not only inform us about the successful metrics of the fraud portion, right? Which would be a higher percentage, but also would help to inform the public about the efficacy of the program. But thank you so much for your presentation. I appreciate it very much. And I will now take the chair back, if it's okay with you, Councillor Hine. And there is another speaker. It is Councillor Tattison. So Councillor Tattison, please, for the presenter, what questions you may have.
In your presentation, through the chair, in the pilot project, I thought I heard you say that in the shift to the title Auditor General from City Auditor, that some services now were not going to be done by your office. So that would be consulting services and risk assessment. Who's going to do those jobs if you're not doing that? And will that mean extra costs somewhere else for the city?
Through the chair, that's correct. We won't be doing it, but we haven't been doing it for quite some number of years. The risk assessments we did 2 of them. We delivered to council over the 7 years that I've been here. Now, bear in mind that the alternative to doing a risk assessment, and it was at the time, we did one in child services and we did a risk assessment of fire services. And the alternative was to do an audit. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we won't do work in that area to uncover risks. It's just that we won't do it through that particular tool, which is an entirely different methodology. It is something that can be taken up as part of strategy and performance and accountability. But I think that's a discussion for another day. In terms of consulting, so consulting is another area that was always difficult, even as an internal audit function, because when you're a hybrid, you have to be very careful that when you've done consulting on a project, that you're not compromising your ability to come in later and have an objective look at that project or function. Having consulted on it, even if it's only perception, we had struggles with that. There was one project that we did, I would call it a consulting project, and it was related, it's my first year, it was related to research and review of how the city of Hamilton is doing with respect to performance reporting, dashboards and the like. And we looked at cities all across North America and even in Europe. We wrote an extensive report on what we thought the city should do. But having done that, we had to basically say to ourselves, we can't come in and audit afterwards. That's something we have to forego as an audit candidate in the future, or at least in the reasonably foreseeable future. So I don't know that it has that large an impact, to be honest, because as I said, the bottom line is we haven't been doing this for the last 4 years.
Okay, then. Well, listen, I think I'll leave that to my own research team to find out who would do that if that arose. And just a question. I'm always leery of outside consultants and accountability. So I guess, and not to be disrespectful, but who audits the auditor in terms of, the city councilors seeing how many consultants are used by your office and what amounts are being charged to the city by your office?
So there is a process for auditing the auditor usually it's about every 5 or 6 years. We haven't done it because we just don't have time, but there's an organization that comes in and does a report, and they usually point to process improvements. On your specific question of the cost reasonability, I don't know that that's something that such a review would look at. It's really up to, if you're interested in who we've hired and how much we paid, it would really be a matter of reporting that to you on a regular basis so that you can be your own judge of whether or not we got value. There's always a context to it. I mean, some of the so-called consultants that we hire, it might be a very small amount, and in others, it's quite large. If you recall the Kroll investigation, which is public knowledge, that Kroll investigation that we did with respect to Waterdown Gardens was quite expensive. But it was public. That information was made public. So I don't have an issue with making the costs public or who we're using. It's just a question of perhaps making that a regular reporting feature of our unit.
Well, I'll take that up with you offline and offline with my fellow counselors to see if that's something that they feel, if there's a need, or if it's just, my, leeriness as a former principal and watching waste and so forth and who's accountable for it. So thank you very much, city auditor, soon to be Auditor General.
So if I might address the question a little bit further in terms of the cost of consultants, it's a fair point. I would acknowledge that. But it's going to be, and I can tell you right now, it's going to be an argument in favor of having more staff, because it's obviously less expensive to have staff that are capable of doing investigations than it is to spontaneously look around and see who's available to do investigations. They're not planned. They are really spontaneous. And so to get a quick response, sometimes you are challenged. We've currently dealt with the situation in part, and I won't say it's a totally satisfactory solution, but in part we've dealt with that situation by bringing back from retirement, actually retired last year, to help us out so that we can reduce the cost and the need for hiring consultants.
And through the chair, just one final comment. Thank you very much, City Auditor. I'm always about using data to make informed decisions. So if that would be supported, hiring extra staff, that would be one way that I would, that would be something I would support. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Tattison. It might be worthwhile at some point to have a discussion. It seems like there's a through thread I'm following since I'm on all the standing committees that you're on. In terms of consultancy, maybe worth bringing a motion forward here in consultation with staff about getting a report about consultancy in general at the city and having that conversation come back. And that would obviously include the auditor. I know we do some reporting right now. That reporting is maybe not holistic in nature. So, and it may not capture all the things that you're wanting to capture. So I would just say maybe that's an opportunity for you to bring forward a motion to this committee in the future. So I'll leave it there. And thank you so much for bringing that up. And thanks to the soon-to-be Auditor General, Charles Brown. I've been proleptic this entire time by saying Auditor General. So can I at this point have someone to receive the presentation, to vote, a mover in Alex Wilson, a seconder in Councillor Huang, and we will go to electronic vote to receive the report, the presentation, pardon me. Shall arrive soon to you electronically. I will say so when it pops up. It's popping up now. And that carries 7-0. I feel like this is the most unanimous committee ever. We're always so unanimous. I wanted to, at this point, we're going to be looking at the report. So just before somebody moves or seconds to put the report on the presentation, I just want to make sure that you're in favor of the recommendations that are there, because that's part of putting it on the table, because the recommendations get approved as part of this same motion. So moved by Councillor Alex Wilson, seconded by Councillor Beattie. Great. Any discussion on the report or questions for staff on this? Sorry, any questions for staff on the report itself? I see Councillor Beattie and Councillor Alex Wilson, so we'll start with Councillor Beattie for questions for staff on the report, and then we can make comments perhaps.
I'll hold because it was a comment more than a question.
Councillor Alex Wilson, any questions for staff about the recommendations in the report?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Kretsch, question, I think for GM Zagaric, potentially for soon-to-be City Auditor Brown, but it's just about following up on Councillor Tattison's questioning there. My understanding of the recommendations is that the main recommendation is being put forward as opposed to alternative for consideration to bringing it in-house, because the external provider is able to provide a much cheaper service just because they're presumably providing it to multiple entities using the same staff, so we're saving some money there. I guess on the following up on Councillor Tattison's comments about internal, external consultant pieces there, when the Office of the City Auditor was doing internal investigations, whether those were risk management or other internal investigations, were there any common threads, or are there common threads in putting work out externally? I'm just trying to better understand the difference between the main recommendation and alternative for consideration to, in that context of, could we be staffing up for multiple synergies across departments? And so I think that's to say it more clearly, the question or the information I'm looking for is just when we were doing those internal audits and when we are putting things out for consultant, are there any through lines or very common ground that's often happening?
So through the chair, so when we hire consultants, if they're for investigations, we don't have a budget for consultants. We have a budget for staff. If we use, now currently we have 2 vacancies and we have monies available to us from that to pay for investigations or audit expertise that we need. Sometimes there's 2 reasons to go out external for us. One is to have the expertise that we need to do the work. An example of that would be when we got the allegations of DART's vehicles being unsafe. We're not experts in safety. We hired the expertise, and that was of necessity to find consultants doing that. The other reason is to supplement our resources. We've got already too many investigations, perhaps 2 or 3, each being done by a staff member, as well as the audits that they're doing. And so we just don't have the capacity to deal with it on a timely basis. So we need to go external for that. If we go external for an investigation, as I said, I don't have a budget for that. So what I do is I charge, and this is similar to what HR does, charge the department for that expense of the investigation. So that's how we fund it. In terms of improving it, yes, one of the alternatives is to address that situation now. The only thing is I feel compelled to have some kind of business case to present to you, given the information I think Councillor Tattison was talking about and the insights that he was speaking to. But we intend to bring such a case probably in the summer to speak to the need for additional, at least one additional FTE, so that we can address our investigative needs, which then has an impact on our ability to do audits, and hopefully have that all teed up so that we'd have somebody on board for next year.
Through the chair, I think that really clearly answered my question, and so I'm really appreciative. No more from me. Thank you.
Any more questions before we get to just debate on the subject itself, or comments in favor or against, and then any motions with respect to alternatives? I'm not seeing, so Councillor Beattie, take it away. We're in the discussion / debate portion. Have fun.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't grandstand a lot, but I will grandstand for audit all day long. I think that there's a happy irony to the fact that the function being proposed of an Auditor General is value for dollar, and the report that I see here offers very good value for dollar, in my opinion. This whistleblower program improves processes, identifies weaknesses, identifies losses, leads to the prevention of future losses, offers the opportunity to recover some of these losses, leads to better accountability, more transparency within our government. For me, it's a no-brainer, and I'm very happy to offer my enthusiastic support, and thus ends the grandstanding through you, Chair.
Wow. A minor grandstand if I've ever seen one, but thank you, Councillor Beattie. So at this point, are there anybody wishing to put forward, just making sure, because I heard before, anyone wanting to put forward an alternative recommendation, or are we just going to proceed in the manner? Okay, so with the same mover and seconder, if there's seeing no further discussion, we will go to the vote, and it is now there. And that carries 7-0. And we're moving on in our agenda now to presentations having been concluded. We're on to consent items. And so the first consent item here is the Committee Against Racism minutes from February the 6th, 2023, which is 9.1B. And that's because 9.1A and 9.1C were withdrawn, as you may recall. So we just have that. May I have a mover and seconder to receive the February 6th, 2023 Committee Against Racism minutes? I see Councillor Beattie and Councillor Clark. Are there any questions on this item or discussion? Not seeing any. We will indicate our votes electronically. Great, that carries 7-0. And we're going to move on now to other consent items. And we're going to do this together in a group in case, and we'll pick out ones that people want to pick out if there are any. But may I have a mover and seconder to put consent items 9.2 through 9.8 on the floor, moved by Councillor Clark. Will someone second that? Moved by Councillor Huang. Are there any questions to staff on any of these items? And we'll just kind of go in order. So I'll just say them out. And if you have a question for staff on these, you can. Did you want to interject, Elsie Bates? Please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Cretch. Just a reminder that we do have to display the new Appendix A for 9.3.
Oh yeah, okay. So when we get to 9.3, we'll just pause there and we'll do that in case there's a question. So does anybody have any comments on 9.2? I do, so seeing nobody else, I will go ahead if Councillor Schwang will take the chair.
Sure.
Thanks. So a couple of things about this, and I appreciate that we see a schedule here of complaints. It's attached as Appendix A. My questions are primarily about the complaint process and then about Appendix A. So my questions about the complaint process are specifically around the penalties and around disclosures for those who complain. I ask because, and my understanding is, and I want to confirm this through whichever staff member can confirm it, that what happens is there are very many ways to complain about a violation of the fair wage policy. If you're an entity, you can complain. So if you're an organization or an association, you can make a complaint. But if you're a worker or a person, you can also complain. But that there is some ability, there is not complete anonymity when it comes to the complainant, if you're an individual. meaning that FOI requests, this is my understanding, FOI requests can be put in, that information can be obtained about the identity of the person complaining, and that this may in some way limit, cause fear, cause apprehension from individuals doing so because, of course, their livelihoods at stake. And so I wanted to talk about that openly and ask questions of staff of if they could speak to that issue about the ability for complete anonymity when it comes to complainants.
So thank you, Councillor. Is that going to Director Hesmer or to manage? Okay.
Through the chair, I'll let Tina Ayako answer that question.
So through the chair, Tina Ayako, Manager Procurement. If a complaint is received from anyone, the anonymity of the complainant from the procurement section is always upheld. So we do not disclose who the complainant is. If there was an MFOI request with respect to a fair wage complaint, then we would look to the FOI office to determine whether that was disclosed or not. I can't comment on what their parameters are for disclosure. But with respect to the procurement section and corporate services as a whole, the anonymity of the complainant is always upheld.
Thank you, and I appreciate that as perhaps an opportunity to close that gap and find that information and ensure that there's a policy that, even when it comes to MFIPA and finding out how that works, for instance, we have whistleblower policies and other kinds of audit concerns that allow that kind of anonymity to happen. Because whether or not that may be the case, the perception, I'm just saying, what I'm hearing often is the perception exists that. So if the perception exists that that's the case, then I think there's work for us to do, and I'll leave it at that. My second question is the appendix specifically about the ISD building for the Hamilton Police Services, which is the only item there, which looks like it was complained about in 2019, if my memory serves me correct. And I don't know what the nature of this complaint was. This chart doesn't give us that information. And what else could you tell us about the nature of this complaint and why it remains unresolved at this time?
Through the chair, the complaint was with respect to fair wage not being paid to the employees of the subconsultant or the subcontractor in this respect.
Thank you, Manager. Councillor?
Yeah, and it hasn't been resolved yet, is my understanding. Is that correct?
Through the chair, the audit has been completed by KPMG. The next step in the process would be to share the audit results with both the GC and the subcontractor and get their comments. If they're not disputing the results, then it is our understanding that the difference in any monies to any of the employees who were short paid, that restitution would be made. We would get written confirmation of payment and the file will be closed.
That's helpful. Thank you. And through the chair, there's a question here for me too. And thank you for really clearly separating out between general contractor and subcontractor. It's my understanding the current policy doesn't really get into what would happen for subcontractors. There seems to be, if there's, like what I'm saying is that we're addressing the issue to the subcontractor, but in terms of outcomes with respect to penalties, I'm not sure I have the right word at the moment, but when we talk about discipline or penalties or whatever might happen to a general contractor, if there's a finding against them, sometimes there's just reallocation of the wages. My understanding is other things can happen. And so are subcontractors treated the same way as general contractors are treated in terms of the way this policy is constructed overall?
Through the chair, in the last iteration or revision to the fair wage policy, subcontractors were added to the policy to be treated the same as a GC. So the contractual relationship between a sub and a GC, the city is not part of that relationship. And so therefore, if there is any short payments to employees, we would address those short payments with the general contractor. And then in turn, the general contractor would work with the subcontractor to get us any of the information that's required for the audit. So in respect, the policy was changed to impose any penalties, the same penalties that would be imposed upon a GC would be imposed on a subcontractor. But we have to respect the contractual relationship between the city and the GC.
That's the distinction I was looking for. Thank you very much for that answer. I appreciate it very much. Those are my questions about this thing. And Councillor Huang is magically returning the chair to me. I still receive that. Thank you, Councillor Huang. We're at 9.3 now, and at this moment we shall pause. And Elsie Bates will put up on the screen, or L.A. Whalen will put up on the screen the Appendix A. Can you perhaps identify verbally for everybody what the change exactly was? Someone, whoever wants to do that.
Through the chair, Mike Zagarek, General Manager, Finance Corporate Services. There was a clerical error to Appendix A. Inadvertently, expenses were double counted for the mayor and councillors under previous term of council, and so that is the reason for deleting the previous Appendix A and replacing it with the version that is before committee now.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments about 9.3? Not seeing any questions or comments about 9.3. Move to 9.4.
Sorry, question.
Oh, I apologize. Councillor Huang on 9.3. Take it away.
To the clerk, will we receive this in an email form then? The new.
Through the chair to the councillor, I could do that, but I will be posting it to publishing it to eScribe to replace the existing Appendix A as soon as right after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. That is all.
Okay, questions on 9.4. I don't hear any. 9.5. 9.6. 9.7. And finally arriving at 9.8. Okay, not hearing questions or comments on these consent items. I will now call the electronic vote to receive them.
And just confirming that councillors Clark and Huang are the movers and seconders to that.
Correct, yep. The vote is up. And that carries 7-0. And now we're on to 10, which are discussion items. So use of external services for tax assessment and appeals. That's report FCS 20005B, also known as LS 21047A of the outstanding business list item, and that has citywide implications. You have a mover and seconder to put that report on the floor. I see Councillor Alex Wilson is moving that. I have a seconder to put the item on the floor, or report on the floor. Councillor Huang. It's now on the floor. Are there any questions for staff on the report? Councillor Clark, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Cratch. I'm looking at, what am I looking at? Appendix A of the report, External Services for Tax Assessments and Appeals. If I go to the far right-hand side to the bottom, it shows total municipal tax loss mitigated net of external costs. And so what I'm interpreting here is that $8.9 million was mitigated or prevented from losing, or was that lost?
So through the chair, I will start. The councillor is correct in his initial interpretation. These are tax losses that have been mitigated, and in part it relates to, I believe it was agenda item 9.5 or 6, the assessment report. Just some background, some context is council approved a pilot project whereby the city would more actively participate in assessment appeals. And we did that in recognition that there was an industry establishing that proactively engaged with property owners as it relates to actively participating in assessment and appeals in an effort to reduce their tax burden. So City Council provided approval for a pilot project for the city to equally actively participate in assessment appeals in an effort to preserve assessment base, recognizing that the majority of appeals are in the commercial and industrial sector, recognizing that City Council has set a priority to grow or retain the non-residential assessment base. So apologize for the lengthy response, but the Councillor Clark's initial interpretation is correct. This is a good news story, a positive story. It is one of the business cases that's before Council through the 2023 budget. We inadvertently erred in omitting the expertise, the external expertise that would complement legal services in an effort to participate as it relates to assessment appeal. So yes, approximately $9 million, and yes, approximately 90% in terms of the value of the assessments that are being appealed that city staff have been able to retain. Final comment is that is likely an understatement because there's a number of withdrawals as it relates to assessment appeals. And we would suggest those withdrawals in part relate to the city now actively participating in that process. And so that $9 million is likely a underrepresentation as it relates to the outcome of this work.
Thank you for that. And I'm really happy to see the results. If I can just jump, and I apologize again, page 3 of 7 in the report, the last paragraph looks like it's addressing the external costs. And so the $254,000 was what we set as the budget. And of that, only $109,000 was incurred to support over 33 appeals, and the money that's left over is still being used, I guess. Is that the case, or how is that working?
Yeah, so through the chair, the report speaks to $254,000 of actual expenses. $109,000 relates to appeals that have been closed, the 33 appeals that have been closed, so the external experts that were used as it relates to those efforts. And then there are some pending or open appeals, and that represents $145,000 of expenses to date.
So would I be fair in characterizing it this way, Chair? We spent $254,000 and saved $8.9 million?
Through the chair, yes, in part is the internal resources as well. So the internal resources are principally existing resources, so not additional, with the exception of council provided us the authority to hire a lawyer and a admin support on contract, and that is before committee and council on March 29th, with the request to make that permanent given the business case.
Mr. Zagaric is being too humble while he is indicating that council made the decision. It was Mr. Zagaric that came to us with that original recommendation, which has proven to be a smart move. So I wish to thank Mr. Zagaric and their staff, and of course our outside consultants. This was a successful program, and I hope it continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark, and there are no more speakers I see on the list for item 10.1, and so we will go to approve the recommendations in the report. There'll be a vote. It has arrived. And it carries 7-0. We're on to item 10.2, which is the request to extend the banking services agreement, FCS 2036. And this is for approval. May I have a mover and seconder to put the report on the floor? Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Alex Wilson. Are there any questions for staff on the report? I see Councillor Alex Wilson. Please go ahead.
So not so much a question on the report in front of us. It seems like we don't have a ton of choices in terms of the very short term. And so I think more so a question is, what does this review look like with respect to our banking provider in that RFP process that we're building out for the next 3 years? And so just seeking some clarification if the chair about asking about that RFP process is going to be considered in germane to the report. Cool.
So through the chair, I'll invite Director Hesmer, Acting Director Hesmer, if she can just speak to what staff envisioned the RFP. It would be a competitive process as it relates to the banking functions, and maybe if Shelley can maybe expand a bit in terms of what is envisioned as it relates to that RFP process. Thank you.
Through the chair, Shelley Hesmer, Acting Director, Financial Services, Taxation and Corporate Controller. So through that RFP process, what we would be looking to do is obviously put through an RFP to sort of maintain what we're currently doing with the banking services currently. So we have about 30 bank accounts. Through that, we would also have to look at integrating our reports to make sure that we can mitigate any fraud potentially that could happen. We'd also be looking at configuring like our financial reports and, through the systems that we currently use. Currently, there's a lot of things that we use through the RBC Express that we'd be looking for similar solutions with the RFP process as well.
Thank you. And to what extent do we know what the market looks like? Is it just limited to the big 5 banks that are likely to be potential providers? Do credit union, like are credit unions going to be part of this RFP process potentially based on what our need is? Like how big is the actual market?
That's a very good question through the chair. We did do some surveying and looking at other municipalities to see what they're currently, who they currently hold as their banking service provider. The bank provider that we currently use is the top one that we've seen across most of the municipalities that we did survey. The difficulty was in and around Ontario Works. So we were looking to those municipalities that do have Ontario Works to see what banking services were being provided from like our current provider. Having said that, there is the 5 big banks. I think those would be the normal ones that would probably submit to the RFP, I would suspect.
Thank you. And just a comment on, to our knowledge, and maybe we don't have this knowledge right now, and that's what the RFP is going to be, is the scope of the services we require offered by any credit unions right now, or is that would that be possible for them to apply? I'm just kind of, when we're talking about an open procurement process, but only 5 people can likely apply, like just trying to get a sense of how big that market actually is. Would credit unions and other financial institutions potentially be able to weigh in, maybe some of the larger ones, or is that probably not in the scope given what our needs are?
Likely with our needs within the scope, I don't think that would be the case, but it's open. So, I mean, they can still put a bid in based on the scope that's in the RFP.
Thank you. And I guess some of the reasons I'm asking along this line of questioning is to what extent can we, in this, push some of our existing ethics as a city, values as a city, and priorities as a city forward. So for example, we know that climate change is a big priority, and we also know on a weekly basis there's local residents protesting in front of RBC locations about the funding of the CGL pipeline and Indigenous rights violations. I guess I'm wondering, even if it's not to that extent of divestment or taking a big stance, to what extent can we ask for climate risk disclosure? When we were hearing about our climate action plan, we were hearing that we can only really focus on, I'm missing the technical term, but in-city emissions essentially, and those out of scope, downstream, secondary, tertiary emissions are just so out of scope for us right now. But asking for climate-related risk disclosures as part of our RFP, because that's not regulated right now at provincial or federal levels, but is something that financial institutions and other jurisdictions where it's are regulated, there's standard practices for, it's not hard to do. I guess, to what leverage do we have in this RFP? How attractive are we as a client to this financial providers, or are we kind of at the bequest or at their whim in terms of the services offered?
So through the chair, we can take that offline. I mean, that's formed part of our conversations with, for instance, our procurement policy and the work of the Climate Change Office is recognizing other jurisdictions, sometimes more mature jurisdictions as it relates to upper levels of government, as it relates to specific engagements, require vendors to have a climate neutral strategy or some form of climate strategy. So happy to take that offline and have conversations with our Climate Change Office and procurement to see whether or not, at a minimum, having disclosure of that information. So while it may not be a weight as it relates to the selection of a vendor, it could be information that is required to be disclosed as part of the RFP process.
Thank you. I really appreciate that and would be interested in kind of following up on those conversations, especially as the procurement subcommittee gets going. I'm remembering from early council conversations and some of those onboardings back in November that there was a kind of existing work plan to review procurement. There were some existing procurement innovations or updates in the works. Could we, if any of those are germane to this procurement, could you detail them for us now? Thank you, through the chair.
Through the chair, I'd ask if we could park that to a future conversation. As I alluded to during the departmental budget presentations, is we have some organizational capacity changes or challenges within procurement, and we have been challenged to move forward on existing outstanding items, such as vendor performance and moving forward around social procurement, environmental procurement. And that is a conversation we would like to have, I would like to have with committee and council going forward, and how to resource those efforts going forward.
Thank you, through the chair. I really appreciate that, supportive of the recommendations as they're presented, but I'm really interested in what these next 3 years look like in terms of making sure that when we are looking for an RFP in the future, we're just doing the best we can in that, and ensuring that our vision and values are, you know, permeating into everything we do and all the procurement we do. And so really excited about that future conversation and support of the report in front of us.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, and I will now pass the chair over to Councillor Huang.
Go ahead.
So I'm following up on the line of questioning from Councillor Alex Wilson, who asked almost every question I was going to ask, so I'll be much briefer. Thank you very much for those questions. I specifically am concerned about fossil fuel divestment. I'm specifically concerned about this idea that when I read this report, it says there's an alignment of the 2016-2025 strategic plan. Like, that's great. But what I wonder about is where council's priorities come into this kind of discussion. So as you say, and to allude into your report, this has a significant impact on the city. It's a major decision we make. And I feel it's weird that we're not working with perhaps some smaller financial organizations, like credit unions that are quite large, I would say, but smaller perhaps than the 5 big banks, to find a way to make this happen. So can you talk about how that could be possible? Like, I really want to understand how it might be possible for us to work with a variety of folks to have them be able to apply to this process. If it's restrictive to those 5 banks, essentially, I'm very concerned about that, because I'm not sure that's going to be in line with, or will be in line with, that we'll find out, City Council's priorities.
Through the chair, typically with respect to RFP processes, it's the business needs that determine the priorities through an RFP process. And as we undertake to identify the business needs, and as Acting Director Hesmer identified, is one of the improvements that has been undertaken is with respect to Ontario Works recipients and providing conveniences in terms of electronic banking for Ontario Works. And so that's an example of, we would need to gauge which institutions can provide the services that the city requires or subscribes. Having said that, is if some institutions are not at a state that requires that, it doesn't preclude the opportunity for conversations to say, going forward, recognizing these contracts come up periodically, is in an effort for those organizations to compete in this market, municipalities, is the opportunity for an awareness for those institutions as to what would be required in order to satisfy those those business needs. And it may be that there may be future alignment, or there may not be the opportunity for alignment, just simply because of the capacity or the ability for those institutions. So I'm not familiar with all of the opportunities or restrictions with respect to credit unions as it relates to traditional banking services. But typically through an RFP process, it would be the business needs that determine which vendors or organizations choose to bid on a particular proposal.
And thanks. And what I would ask in response to that is, look, if 95% of the needs of our business can be met, but 5% can't, we could always have this be a hybrid model, could we not? So we put an RFP that just says, look, there are two distinct needs we have: business needs that are occupied in the 95% category, which is like banking, and then the other bit, which is like niche services, like we need services for Ontario Works, and we need services for this and services for this, which are, we can carve them out, and we could offer those up as different proposals. We can say to the Royal Bank, hey, maybe we need you specifically to do this Ontario Works thing. But I'm concerned that we're using this this kind of minority, this one like small percentage, I mean, is what I'm trying to say, small percentage of the overall pie to determine what we would do with the majority of our banking needs. And again, that it wouldn't align with City Council's priorities.
So through the chair, that may be an opportunity. I guess it would be subject to staff assessing in terms of what the business needs are and what the marketplace can satisfy. It also doesn't preclude vendors from consortiums or partnerships. And so that there's an opportunity for some to work with others if they alone cannot satisfy the requirements of the city as it relates to the business needs.
Thanks, and I'll leave my questions there. Just quickly ending with saying, yeah, I think that we have to try and do everything we can to meet that need and to make it easy for vendors to apply. If we're relying on vendors to do things like credit unions to cooperate with the 5 national banks, like I don't necessarily think that that's the avenue to go down, in my personal opinion. I think we just have to do whatever we can to ensure that we're making this as an open, as competitive process as possible, and accessible to as many groups as possible, so that we can try and diversify the way that we deliver these services. Thanks, Councillor Wayne. And I'll take the chair back, and there's the speaker and Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair Kretsch. And there's a little bit of a preamble to my question, if I may have that latitude. I am watching with intent, like many people are, the state of our economy, not just in Hamilton, but across the country and across North America. We are now seeing, as was predicted by some economists, an increase in defaults on mortgages and loans for a number of banks. In the U.S., there have already been 2 banks that are at the point of failing, and they are being bailed out. The question that I have here in Canada and where we are, the funds that we put into the bank and operate from, what happens if there is a significant loss at the bank? Are we protected?
So through the chair, yes, and in part that ties to beyond just business needs, to my earlier response, is security requirements. Under the RFP process, we would identify the requirements as it relates to securing the city's investments or financial assets. So that is a requirement as part of the RFP process, and that may as well be a factor as it relates to who chooses to participate through that process, given their own policies or capacities as it relates to security.
Thank you for that. And finally, Chair, is there a risk of delaying this decision?
Through the chair, the principal reason for what is before you today is just staffing capacity. We had a retirement in our previous director. Acting Director Hesmer is backfilling in the director position. We had Nikki Freeman, who's our acting manager of accounting, and so we had some challenges in terms of gapping in space, and it simply comes down to capacity. Our capacity and able to do the work. There is no risk as it relates to extending the contract. The risk may be in not extending the contract, the quality of the work that we would do in order to get this work out the door sooner.
Thank you. I'll support the extension. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing no further speakers on this issue. And are there any comments anybody want to make with respect to the recommendations? No? Just checking. Okay, so I'll now vote to approve the recommendations in the report. Councillor Beattie is indicating in the affirmative, is in favor. And that carries 7-0. And now we're on to item 10.3, which are accounts receivable write-offs for 2022. Report FCS 23017. May I have a mover and seconder to put the report on the floor. Moved by Councillor Huang, seconded by Councillor Tattison. Thank you. I'm looking for speakers. Councillor Huang, you're up first.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about this accounts receivable. I wonder if I can ask through you, Chair, to GM Zagaric, are these numbers typical year over year? Because I do see that these numbers are for this year only. And so I wonder if, what's the trend look like? Is this a weird anonymous, a weird year?
Through the chair, I'll start and then I'll maybe invite Manager Bev Neal to speak to the trend as Bev leads the development of this report annually. It varies from year to year. I don't believe what's before you this year is different financially materially different than previous years. It varies from year to year in terms of program areas that are incurring difficulties as it relates to collections. And I would say the program areas that are in this report typically find, for various reasons, they are challenged in realizing all of their receivables. But maybe I'll ask Manager or Bev if she can just share her recollection whether or not this is a typical year or an anomaly.
Through the chair, Bev Neal, Manager of Accounts Payable, Accounts Receivable. This is a little lower than it has been for the last couple of years. Through COVID, there was a lot, the beginnings of COVID, there was a lot of delay in having vendors pay. I think a lot of small vendors just disappeared. We had a lot of issues with one-time payments, not being able to collect. This year, it seems to be a little bit on the lower side for it. Now, it goes, it depends on if a public works has a very large contract and there's a delay in that payment. We could run into problems in future years, but this year's it's not any higher. It's in fact lower than it has been.
Okay, thank you, both GM Zagaric and Manager Bev. Through you, Chair, I just wanted to highlight that there in Appendix C, 55 million from the Hamilton's Farmers Market. Now, I'm also mindful that there is significant changeover at the Hamilton's Farmers Market, but it's just something to highlight. And as well, I do want to ask, what is the difference between finance charges versus exhausted collections? Through you, Chair, to maybe GM Zagaric.
So through the chair, I'll start, and maybe if I could just make a correction, farmers market was $55,000, not $55 million, just for the public record. So I'll speak to, so exhaustive collections, those are all the efforts that the city undertakes as it relates to trying to realize the receivables, the revenues receivables. And Bev can maybe speak to those collection efforts. Financial charges is a reoccurring theme that each year when we bring forward this report is highlighted. Financial charges are when there are late payments the additional charges for late payment. And there are many organizations who refuse to pay late payment charges. And to be fair, the city does not make late payment charges. And so I want to be fair in terms of how we represent late payment charges. If, for instance, it's a payment that's due in 30 days and payment is not received till 35 days, there's a late payment charge for the 5 days beyond the 30, and many institutions do not pay that. City of Hamilton is one of those institutions that does not pay that. We set out to make payments when required, but in the case where we are late, we too do not pay late payment charges, and that is principally the financial charges. And maybe if Bev can just quickly summarize the collection efforts.
Through the chair, yes, we have outlined in the accounts receivable policy different routes that we take to try to collect. Sometimes it's negotiation with the department and the vendor, and they find that there's been an error in the invoicing, but normally it's somebody just not paying. We look in accounts payable to see if we owe them any funds, and we can offset it. We send it through to collections. And the collections, if sometimes it's legal action if it's a large amount. For late payment fees, the one issue we have with the late payment fees is that a collection agency will not go after a vendor or customer for the late payment fees. They will for the full amount of the invoice, but once the customer has paid the invoice, we don't have a lot of chance of getting the late payment fees, except that we do follow the process. We call, we send them letters, we send them statements, all of the things that are outlined in the accounts receivable policy.
Thank you. Then may I ask about the line item of 28 Lister restaurants? It is an exhausted collection, but it's not a bankrupt collection. So what is the length of time where we just call it as an exhausted collection?
I think we have Delphina Duarte online to speak to the Lister.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm Delphina Duarte, Manager of Facility Planning and Business Solutions. We don't really have a specific timeline. However, this tenancy took place between 2014 and 2019. In 2019, they were evicted, and we had a legal action against them. We were afforded a default judgment in 2019, and it essentially the efforts to collect, because that tenant disappeared during the court trial, we've been unable to locate them. So for that reason, we've determined that we've exhausted our collections at this point, which is 2023. It's been a judgment call that way. We have not been able to find the tenant since.
Okay. Thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
If I can hand the chair to you, Councillor Huang. We'll just do this all day. I really appreciate it. My questions are about specifically the farmers market and the lodges accounts, because Councillor Huang asked my other question about the Lister block. And what I'm seeing, if I read this from the exhausted collections note, primarily, I'll say, for the farmers market is that, and I have some insight there, so limited, mind you, I've just become the chair recently, but could you talk to me about the typicality of this also, in terms of, for the farmers market to start, about, have we seen a lot more of this, and what you see as a control for this? Because I know how this all works in terms of the way we attempt to collect rent for market vendors and things like that. And there are prescripted bylaws, there are rules and there are policies about when that happens. And then there's leniencies of certain kinds. But those leniencies tend to mean that the amount that we're writing off every year is much, much higher. And so I'm wondering if the city of Hamilton is going to be recommending something to the farmers market in terms of suggested controls or suggested policy improvements to allow for a reduction in this kind of thing. Because I have a little bit of insight as to kind of what this is coming from. So whoever wants to answer that question about that.
Sorry, through the chair, if I can ask the councillor, is your question, because I see we have the manager farmers market, is it specific to the processes that the farmers market follows, or is it some support that the city corporately can provide to the farmers market, if I can just ask?
Yeah, the questions aren't for Bill specifically, no. The questions are for us, and I'm asking what support we can provide to the farmers market. We're the ones that do the write-offs, right? So we're writing these off as a corporation, not the farmers market specifically. And so what I'm asking you is, is this typical? Because I'm seeing the largest group of exhausted collections are coming from this area. So I'm trying to understand from perhaps someone here it's more of a high level understanding of the typicality of this and what controls organizations can suggest to our subsidiary organizations like the Hamilton Farmers Market to improve these things. If you see there's a need for improvement, that's also up to you.
Unfortunately, I don't have a lot to do with the farmers market collection. They do their own collections, but they do have a bad debt allowance. So what they do is throughout the year, Bill, he has a good understanding of what's happening at the market, where the risks are, and they put aside a bad debt allowance to cover any losses at the market. So it doesn't impact the budget for this year. It's already been recorded in bad debt, and once it's written off, that's where it'll be charged to. But I believe the market follows the same policy of trying to collect from these vendors, and sometimes they disappear and they're not able to collect. So when they put on their list that they've exhausted their collections, it means that they've followed the policy.
Okay, and I will take up the rest of the bill at the farmers market. This is not the forum for that. I'm just wanting to ask from a high level here at this committee, right, what the way we approach these things and how we look at them. And I think I have a good enough answer about that now that I should really take these things up with the farmers market board specifically. Thank you. My second question is about lodges. And so I just want to make sure I understand what I'm seeing here. I'm not interested in knowing anything more than what's on here in terms of identifiable information. But what I'm seeing here is that there are arrears when paying for accommodation. I assume that's like to live at the lodge. There's rent. So, and then, but I'm not sure. So I'm wanting to understand if somebody can unpack that a bit more.
Yeah. So I can start, and then if Bev can expand, and just recognizing, just respecting the confidentiality as it relates to these residents, is typically this relates to individuals who were residents at the lodges and who have likely have passed away, and the trust does not have sufficient funding, the estate does not have sufficient funding, and the city has no further recourse, and that typically represents the write-offs that are brought before committee.
Thanks, that's helpful. I appreciate that. That's all the questions I have. I'll take the chair back from Councillor Horn. I don't see any further speakers on the list, so we will now move to the approval of the report. Thank you. And that's carried. And we'll now go to 11.1. So Councillor Huang, can you take the chair, please?
Yes, for 11.1 feasibility, motion for a feasibility of a bring your own device policy. Councillor Crutch, please introduce your motion respecting this policy.
Thanks. It's moved by me, and this is before the time I was thinking to get seconders in advance, so looking for a seconder. It's the feasibility of a bring your own device policy. The reason I'm asking for this, and you have this has been a notice of motion and it's on the agenda, everyone's seen it. I will speak to exactly what I'm trying to accomplish here so it's clear, and the kind of outcomes I expect or hope will come from a report back about the feasibility of doing this. In general, and I've said this before, but I want to be maybe clearer, there's all kinds of software that gets used to do things in our offices, and I'll give you just one example. For instance, sometimes we need to produce graphics for something that's coming up on an event. We need to do something with our websites, which are not necessarily related to the city specifically, but they require us to have the tools to be able to do those things in a reasonable way in our offices. I can tell you for sure, this device I'm holding cannot do it all. It can do some things, but it cannot do it all. And so how we're able to bring other equipment in to the city to be able to do that, I think is important. And I think also being concerned about the security issues as well. So the report back will give us that sense of like, look, can we do this or can't we do this? What are the security issues involved in doing so? Because there are ways to create, and you've all used this before, networks that are securely separate from the city's network. We have one here, which is insecure, mind you, the Hamilton guest Wi-Fi. Like that Wi-Fi is not going to give people who are on it access to the city's secure network. We can create a number of SSIDs or other kinds of Wi-Fi and secure networks to allow for people to do things that aren't requiring their access to the city's protected or private network, but still do some form or function of their office work or their job work. Right now, I'll just say, and I'll say it in passing without getting into it too much, there is not an extraordinary amount of security in every aspect of what we do with our devices, and there can't be. It's not possible. There are gaps and holes. And so I don't want to act like this is an impenetrable fortress and introducing other technology here is somehow going to undermine the fortress. We're all using these devices that we have here, these laptops, mobilely, right? And we access VPN networks, other kinds of things to access the networks here. Those things are not infallible. We store documents on these devices. So in a way, I just want to make it clear that there could be rules put in place here to make it possible to do this. I think it's important to do it. I also don't think that 100% of the accessibility guidelines are solved by one platform in this world. Like Microsoft does not have the market on that. There are other things that other operating systems and other kinds of devices do and then bring that have greater accessibility for people that they may wish to use. Right now, we're restricted from doing so in any kind of meaningful way. And in any way connecting to the city's network to use these devices like internet on site, essentially. So we can't actively use these kinds of devices in the building on the city's network in any kind of meaningful way. So that creates a problem because the internet is real and it is required for all the things that we do with our jobs. So I just think there needs to be more thought put into this and also consideration of our cybersecurity insurance, that kind of stuff. But getting a report back gives us a chance to actually consider whether this is possible. This exists elsewhere. Bring your own device policies exist at many other corporations. This is not new. I think it's something we should consider. That's my motion. That's why I'm putting it forward. Just looking for a seconder.
Thank you. So moved by Councillor Crutch, seconded by Councillor Maureen Wilson. Can we take that to a vote, please? Sorry. Oh, I am so sorry, as I cannot see. I'm very sorry. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you. So can I ask staff a question with regards to this type of policy? How would we ensure freedom of information requests can be conducted on machines that are not owned by the city?
GM Zagarek?
Yeah, through the chair, we would consider that as one of the factors when reporting back is with respect to access of information that's on the device, as well as any of the operational needs that elected officials and their offices might have in the solutions, is not only as it relates to IT security, but data and information security as well.
Councillor Clark?
I'm really uncomfortable with the motion, and I understand it's not convenient the way it's set up currently. I don't get me wrong, but I am concerned that if we create such a policy that we will lose the ability to do freedom of information searches on devices that are not owned by the city, because we don't have the authority to do that. We can only have freedom of information searches and investigations into our emails or our devices if they're owned by the city. And so this, in my mind, opens up some significant risks to transparency. While we're trying to be more convenient, I don't believe our Freedom of Information officers, unless the staff can correct me on this, that they can access our home phones or our home computers. Is that not correct?
GM Zagarek?
Yeah. Through the chair, unfortunately, we don't have the relevant staff to answer that question, but
It's a city device.
But if it's a personal device, he's
saying. Why aren't the relevant staff here, given that the motion has been on the docket?
Edie Fontana?
So through the chair, Laura Fontana, Executive Director of Human Resources. So just in understanding your question, Councillor Clark, if we have a personnel-related matter involving an employee that we would have to look at perhaps their activity, we are able to do so when it's a city-issued device because it is city property. We would be very challenged, and we can certainly do more investigative work into that matter, but we would be very challenged to do any investigative work in terms of activity or sites or even the amount of time searching non-business related work if it's not a city-issued device, because it is not our property. So there would be those challenges that and quite frankly, those obstacles that we would have to overcome. And I'm not sure that's insurmountable, but we would certainly delve into that deeper when we would provide that additional insight if we're pursuing this motion.
Thank you, Edie Fontana. Councillor?
I fear that the unintended consequence, or perception perhaps instead of consequence, will be that people will accuse us as to trying to avoid transparency by using our home phones, a personal cell phone or personal computer. So I feel very uncomfortable. I understand it's inconvenient. I have done work on my computer at home, put it in a file, put it in one of those, I don't know what you even call it, a little stick?
USB drives?
What do you call it? Thumb drive? Okay, thumb drive. And I bring that to and put it in the computer, and it does the security on it, and then I can open up my file here. So that might be a possible solution, but the council is correct, it's not convenient at all. You can also have staff purchase the computer that you're looking that will operate the program that you want, and even purchase the program through IT if you're looking at specific desktop publishing implications or desires that you can't do currently on this laptop, and even my laptop, I have a little bit of challenge because I'm doing too many things on it, and it's not capable, and it just grinds to a halt. So I'm not going to support the motion. I understand the intent, but I fear that we will have no control in terms of transparency and accountability, and I fear what the public perception may be there. So I do thank the councillor, though, for bringing his concern here. And I think the IT, if you worked with them, they could solve some of that if this motion does not go through. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Back to Councillor Crutch.
Thanks. I think there might be a couple of misunderstandings about the motion in the way that it's being put forward. And I did try to make it clear in the motion, but I will reiterate. This is not about approving a policy. It's about discussing the feasibility of it, doing and bringing a report back to answer those very questions. And also, FOI doesn't work that way. So I know that we don't have the relevant staff here, but I'm going to say something. And I know because I currently am in receipt of being asked for it, and have been through the process a number of times. Computers are not searched by FOI staff. It's just not how it works. So our ability to, and this motion is only for councillors and their staff as a control group specifically, a pilot, so that we can do this. Also, that could be brought up into discussion and the feasibility report back, saying, look, we do have a concern about the FOI issue here, and these devices could only be used for X or Y. They couldn't be used for these other kinds of things. These are the purposes they could be constrained to be used for. These are the networks they could be constrained to be on. So the whole point of this report back, which is all I'm asking for, is to find out the answer to that question. For instance, Councillor Clark, no, I cannot purchase whatever technology I want through the staff and get it put it here. That is not true. If I'd like to use any non-Windows software or any non-PC computers, I'm limited from doing that. I'm not permitted to do so, to use those on the city's network. Like, I'm not permitted to do that. So that is a big barrier. And again, I'll say that no one platform has the market on accessibility. There's a lot of other accessibility features on Mac computers and Apple computers that are not available in the same manner on a PC. Again, those computers are just statistically known to be much better at handling graphics, design, publication. We have newsletters, all these kinds of things. They're much, much better at handling the graphical interface than a PC is. This isn't about convenience from my perspective. This is about me being able to do my job effectively, efficiently, and well. And I feel very constrained right now by the limited amount of software that's available and hardware that's available to us. And so I'm happy for the staff to come back and report on that and say, you know what, Councillor, here are the limits we'd have, or here's how much it would cost. But I just want to say that I think that's where I'm at now in terms of just wanting to have that answer and make the decision based on that.
So to summarize, Councillor Crutch, we're looking at just the feasibility of actually bringing forward this. Okay, thank you. First time speaker to Mark Tattison.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wang. I understand what Councillor Crutch is saying with the intent. It's not the intent to put the motion, like the intent is to simply raise the issues that Councillor Clark had about this motion, and that staff would be looking at things more in depth. My concern is that we as a council, we've put a lot of demands on staff with our motions. So my question is to IT staff or anyone on staff that could answer. What's the capacity of IT staff to conduct a study at this point? Is that going to put more demands on their time? Is it going to be off the side of their desk? Just what's their current workload? And I want to be conscientious of that because we have put a lot of demands on our staff with our motions from this current council.
Thank you, Councillor. To GM Garrett.
Through the chair, with respect to a report back, I cannot commit to a timing on the report back. And as the councillor identified, one of the principal issues is capacity. IT is one of those divisions we continue to be challenged with recruitment and retention. We're sitting at approximately 14, 15 vacant positions, including in some sections that would be required to support this work, including IT security. And we would make best efforts as it relates to reporting back, but I cannot commit to the timeline in terms of reporting back.
Thank you, GM Zagarek. To Councillor Tattison.
And I see that the motion doesn't contain a timeline, so I'm comfortable with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tattison. And moving on to second time speaker, Councillor Clark.
Thank you. We have had incidents where security items, confidential documents have been leaked from the room where it has only been the councillors and the city manager and the clerk. And they have searched our emails. They have the ability to search our emails on our computers and on our cell phones. If we allow outside computers, which are owned by councillors, then that search becomes irrelevant. We lose transparency and accountability. And I understand the motion is asking for the feasibility, but the perception alone to the public could be twisted to say we are going to consider a policy that provides more convenience to the councillors and lack of accountability to the city of Hamilton. So I understand what's being proposed, but if a large document and we receive hundreds of confidential documents in a term. When those documents go missing or are leaked, it's investigated because we're all sworn to confidentiality. They look at our computers. They can tell who leaked the document, and they deal with it. You can't do that if you own the document, if you own the computer. We no longer have access to doing that. So I can't support it. I think it really does eliminate transparency and accountability for a municipality, and I think it's completely inappropriate. So I'll just vote against the feasibility study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. And back to second time speaker, Councillor Crutch.
Thanks. Just want to clarify because I don't want there to be a misperception or the perception to be wrong about what's happening with this. We moved to cloud email, so I understand your issue. I don't disagree with you about this notion that if there's a situation they need to search our laptops, that they can search our laptops, and these laptops are for official city business. That's not the same as an FOI request. I want to just be clear about that. That's completely separate. And in terms of searching our email, they don't require our devices at all. It's all cloud-based at this point. They've migrated to that situation. So that's my concern here is I don't want us to get these things all conflated together into a mass where we're saying that these devices can be used for confidential business. They shouldn't be, and that should be something that should be stated in the policy, that they can't be used for confidential business, right? That's a thing that we can do as a policy preventative mechanism. Simply downloading a file to your computer doesn't mean you've shared it with someone. And you're right, if you emailed that out to someone, that would be trackable. And again, they can do that from somewhere in this organization that doesn't require them to have any access to our device. So I want to separate those two things out, right? What is the access to our device actually about? And what is their ability to investigate things about? And I think that this policy will outline that clearly, so we're all clear as to what the updated IT infrastructure here at this organization is, what its limits are, and what we need to do to make sure that we're doing this in a responsible way, which is why I think the report is important, because I do think there's a big gap in understanding between what we currently have here as an organization in terms of IT infrastructure and what we think is going on here versus what's happening.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Are there any other comments or questions? Or seeing none, I would now call to vote, please. There's a question. I saw a hand. Oh, Councillor Tattison.
I'm sorry to extend the conversation further, but I just wanted to get staff's input on things like ransomware getting into the system through devices that aren't really properly vetted by staff. Is there that potential in this as well? And I know that would be looked at in the study, but is that something that someone could give me some advice on right now? Because I really wouldn't want to waste staff's time if this is going to be a no-go.
I'll allow that, so I'm going to ask City Manager Smith.
Through the chair, I'll start and then I'll pass it to GM Zagaric. I would tell you that the whole issue of IT security is getting to be more and more of a specialty, and that's really a question we'd need them to look into. The other group we'd have to talk about is our insurer around cybersecurity. I know from sitting with my colleagues across the province, getting cybersecurity insurance is getting to be extremely challenging, and to the point that some of the insurance costs are so much that it's causing smaller municipalities to have to cut back on service to be able to afford the insurance. So it wouldn't be just our own staff we need to talk to, it would need to be the insurer to ensure this, what the impacts could potentially be to our cybersecurity insurance. So off the top of my head, it's something we'd have to explore further.
And GM Zagaric?
And I would just ask that IT security would be one of those principal lenses that staff would apply to the work, and that would be in the context, as in the motion, is what the operational needs are, understanding what the operational needs are, and then looking at potential solutions and then applying that IT security lens.
Thank you, GM. Councillor Tattison, any follow-up questions?
No, I'm good with that information. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing the outcome of this vote.
Okay. Thank you again. I will open this up again to all of my colleagues if there's any other questions or concerns or. Okay, now please vote. And that vote carried 6-1. Thank you all. And I will now toss the chair back to Councillor Crutch.
Okay, thank
Councillor,
you. Sorry.
Sorry, if you could keep the chair because Councillor Crutch has a notice of motion.
Yes. And we're on to notices of motion. So, Councillor Crutch, what is your notice of motion?
My notice of motion is about the fair wage policy, and I'll ask LC, somebody from the LC crew to put it up on the screen. It's going to remain as a notice. I'm just providing this here now so people have a chance to think about it in advance. I know I don't have to do it this way, but I'm just trying to be as collegial as possible in terms of there being a lot of advance notice. And I will read it out just because it's not, I didn't provide it much in advance, and I apologize. It's specifically with respect to a fair wage policy review, which we are behind on. I confirmed this with, I spoke with Edie Fontana, General Manager Garrick about this before, and so they've had a chance to look at this. But it's have the Human Resources and Finance and Corporate Services staff be directed to engage in a review of the fair wage policy and any related schedules through stakeholder meetings for report back to the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee by the end of Q3 2023 with recommendations based on the stakeholder feedback. And there's a list here now of all the different people that are going to be part of that stakeholder engagement. And that there be stakeholder meetings inviting all stakeholders to each at the beginning of the Q3 2023. So the goal is beginning of 2023 have meetings with stakeholders. By the end of 2023 have a report back here about the fair wage policy and improvements to it. The members of the City Council be permitted to attend as guests to hear stakeholder feedback directly. So there are the whereas reasons for this. A big reason is because of the significant changes to the industry as a result of the pandemic in construction industry and the fair wage policy. For those who don't know, we're dealing with a staggered fee schedule at this point. We're using rates that are before 2023. I think we have to have the discussion here at Council about that and give an opportunity for these folks to do it. And there's been just a lot of feedback over the last few years about this, about the fair wage policy in general, in terms of some of the different thresholds for this different kinds of complaints processes that exist. So this is just an opportunity to have a roundtable, because the way I perceive this, and this is just my view, is that in some way this is kind of like a mini collective agreement. And there isn't really at this point a process around how that gets negotiated between a bunch of parties. I know it's not a collective agreement, but again, it operates in that kind of a way because there's so many folks involved in this discussion. So that's the intention of this. It'll come forward at the next AFNA for an actual vote. It's just a notice for today.
Thank you, Councillor. So we'll see that later on anyway, right? So, all right, moving on. I am now going to pass the chair back to Councillor Crutch.
Thanks. We're now in the general information and other business section, which is item 13, and we're at amendments to the outstanding business list, is 13.1. And item A, which is the use of external services for tax assessment and appeals, and we had that today, so that's going to be removed from the OBL, or outstanding business list. May I have a mover and seconder to put the amendments to the outstanding business list on the floor? Councillor Beattie and Councillor Alex Wilson seconding. Is there any discussion on the amendment? On today's amendment? Seeing none, we will have the vote. And that vote carries. And now we're moving into private and confidential items, of which there are two. I'll read out this preamble, but first, may I have a mover and a seconder to move into closed session respecting items 14.1 and 14.2. I think I saw Councillor Beattie and then Councillor Alex Wilson, and we'll have an electronic vote on that. It's pursuant to section 9.3, subsections A and B of the city's procedural bylaws amended in section 239.2, subsection A and B of the Ontario Municipal Act, as amended as subject matter pertains to the security of the property of the city or local board and to personal matters about identifiable individuals, including city or local board employees. And we'll have that vote now.
And apologies, Chair Crutch, I missed the mover and seconder.
I apologize. That was Councillor Beattie, and then Councillor Alex Wilson was the seconder.
Oh yes, I did have those. Thank you.
Great, that carries 6-0. Members of the public, the meeting will continue following the closed session portion of the meeting when you see the members of the committee rejoin the meeting. The committee will wait up to 5 minutes upon reconvening an open session before proceeding with the meeting to provide members of the public and the media time to return. A reminder to all members of the committee to please ensure you move into the closed session portion of eScribe. And before we move into the closed session, I ask all members of the public to please exit the council chambers and the WebEx meeting now. Any staff that are not directly related to item 14.1 are also asked to please exit the WebEx meeting. When the clerk has determined that only the appropriate attendees are still in council chambers and the WebEx, we'll move on to item 14.1, and we'll have the graying of the windows and the various sounds. Okay, we're back. Welcome, everyone. We're now in open session, and we're at item 14.1, City Auditor Reporting of Serious Matters to Council, Case 63146, Audit Report 23006. We have a mover and seconder to receive the report and that the report remain confidential. I see a movement from Councillor Beattie, a seconder from Councillor Tattison. Please indicate your vote now. I'm in favor, although I'm not in the appropriate place.
And Councillor Clark, okay.
That motion carries 6-0. We're on to 14.2, which is a committee report. May I have a mover and seconder to receive the report and that the report remain confidential. Moved by Councillor Alex Wilson and approve the directions to staff that were made during the closed session and that those remain confidential. Moved by Councillor Alex Wilson, seconded by Councillor Brad Clark. And we will have the electronic vote on that as well. I'm in favor, although my e-scribe is mad. There we go. That carries 7-0. We've now arrived to the adjournment portion. By the way, I should say before the second last motion, not the last one, but the one before, Councillor Huang was also in favor in the chamber. I think her vote wasn't recorded, so that was properly 7-0 actually, and sorry for saying 6-0. Adjournment, item 15. May I please have a mover and second to adjourn? Councillor Tattison was up first, seconded by Councillor Alex Wilson. This will require an electronic vote. Please indicate your vote. And that vote carries 7-0. That has been the Audit, Finance, Administration Committee meeting for March 23rd. See you all again, cheery and bright, on April the 6th.